I'm joined by Richard Scott, not Dr. Richard Scott, GP. Dr. Richard Scott, I guess, emeritus you weren't going for, so we'll just say Richard. Hello, Richard.
Thanks, Andy. Good to speak again.
See, I know we've had this conversation, but I still want to call you Doctor and GP, but I know you're not GP.
Well, how about leave off the GP, but you can still call me Doctor. That's allowed.
That's fine. Okay, we'll stick with Dr. Richard Scott. Real doctor, just by the way. So, where are we going tonight? I haven't got any questions for you, so do you want to just dive straight into whatever you've got for us?
Let me do that. So, a couple of weeks ago, Andy, we were discussing the brain, and particularly intelligence. And I mentioned, if you remember, the cleverest man ever, IQ of 276, unimaginable. And then we reflected on some of the brainy people in history, Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, Stephen Hawking more recently. But we agreed, didn't we, that the very, very brainy are not always able in other directions, which led me to raise a concept of emotional intelligence, EQ, as opposed to IQ, in EQ, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, which is something that I'd learnt about when I was a GP trainee more than 25 years ago. And to be honest, I hadn't really come back to it much. And you, I think it was a new concept for yourself. So I thought, time for a refresh for me. And there we are. And so I'll do something on emotional intelligence, if that's okay. And a good source of a medical thing like this is the Christian Medical Fellowship, who I've worked with for many years. And they got all these files available for maybe 50 years. And in 2022, I discovered they looked at emotional intelligence, which is a big subject, but in relation to church leadership. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. Let's have a look at that. Whether or not our listeners are leaders in church or not, there's some key points. And the headline was this: emotional intelligence, ... an essential and valuable tool for effective Christian leadership, written by a PhD student called Louis Brown. So I thought that's good. And we'll come to emotional intelligence, and a definition is in just a moment. But I thought I'd whet our appetites by a statement I found from 1995, which is this: emotional intelligence has the potential to be the most precious, personal and professional tool that any leader can have and utilize, the best thing they can have. And there's much research which shows that being competent in emotional intelligence, or to put it differently, emotional competency, improves our social, emotional, and professional experiences. That was good. But then the author at that time in 1995 says, it's very strange, but there's been very little written on emotional intelligence in relation to Christianity, until he found one study in 2019, which showed that effective communication by emotionally intelligent church leaders is essential to the health of the church. It motivates the congregation, it builds trust. Church members themselves become more effective. In essence, it's an essential tool for leaders. So I'm putting this out there, and Andy, you're leading a radio program. I'm one of 7 leaders in my relatively small church. This is important stuff. So what is emotional intelligence? Well, there's a few definitions. Here's one, coined in the 1990s, which is when it came out. So emotional intelligence is a relatively new discipline since 1990s. Here it is. Here's the definition. It's the ability to monitor our own emotions and those of other people, and to discriminate between them, and then use this information to guide one's thinking and, crucially, one's actions. 5 parts. Number 1, know your emotions. Number 2, manage your emotions. Number 3, motivate yourself. Number 4, recognize other people's emotions. And then 5, which it leads on to, handling relationships. So if you like a summary, understanding our emotions and those of others, perhaps where we're both coming from. Now, I'll use the second definition, which is very linked to this, really, just because it gives us a bit more to get our teeth into. There's a famous psychologist called Daniel Goleman, Goleman. Great having a goal when you're a psychologist. And he defines emotional intelligence in 4 categories. 1, emotional self-awareness. 2, self-management. 3, social awareness, other people, and 4, relationship management. It's pretty similar, knowing yourself and knowing other people, and how can we work together better. And he was a trailblazer in implementing emotional intelligence into the workplace, particularly amongst leaders in organizations, business leaders and church leaders. And it's a bit like, Andy, you and I discussed, didn't we, a fortnight ago, that very, very clever people in terms of IQ can be pretty low in terms of EQ. But this is what Andy found out. He surveyed hundreds of business and church leaders, and this is what he discovered from 2001. This was he discovered that in successful leaders in jobs of all kinds, so this is relevant to all of us, emotional competency, a high EQ, is twice as important as a combination of an IQ and technical competency. So turn it round the other way, being very brainy, having a high IQ, being technologically brilliant at what you do, is less than half as important as being emotionally able. So being emotionally able, understanding yourself and understanding other people, is much more important to an organisation and a church than being good on the overheads and even being super brainy. Now, that's a challenge for us to grasp, but that's what these studies find. So I then asked myself, well, that's very interesting, but aren't emotions inherently untrustworthy? I remember those of us who've done many, many, many alpha courses will remember how Nicky Gumbel taught us about the three trains, or the three carriages in one train. You've got faith, you've got facts, and you've got feelings, emotions. And the mistake many Christians make is to hang their feelings at the front of the train and everything else follows depending on how you feel. But you can feel good after a coffee and cake. Now, Andy, I'm late on your show tonight because I've just been stuck in a traffic jam coming back from London. That makes me feel worse. And if my faith depended on how I felt, if the traffic jam affected my faith, that wouldn't be a good thing. Oh, I've just had coffee and cake. My faith's strong. That would be no good. And that Nicky Gumbel was saying on Alpha, you must hang the faith must be driving the train, and the feelings are right at the back. And if you like, the facts are so important. Your faith and your facts go together. They're at the front, feelings well behind. So aren't feelings inherently untrustworthy? We'll hold on to that. But sociobiologists emphasize that at critical moments in our lives, emotions trump intellect. So in difficult situations, there are tasks that are too important to leave to the intellect alone. Times of danger, marriage, frustrations, painful loss. These are all external situations and they affect our emotions, and how we respond in life is not purely intellectual. We know that. We're emotional beings. Interestingly, the Latin word for emotion is motere, M-O-T-E-R-E, which means to move. And when you put an E in front, emotion, it means to move away. So there's a tendency in every emotion to act. Emotion, if you like, prepares the body for action. It might be, I love something. It might be, I hate something. It might be some other feeling. In fact, there are 8 primary emotions: anger, sadness, fear, enjoyment, love, surprise, disgust, and shame. And our Christian leaders, and especially those of us who have any form of leadership, need to recognize that emotions are really important to all the people we link in with. It's not good enough to be the best preacher, the best teacher, the best theologian, or even the best servant in church if we're not emotionally mature. Because if we can't relate to our congregations, all the other competencies can be put to one side. In other words, people will trust you if they trust you, if they understand that you understand them. And then they'll take all your skills, your other gifts, more seriously. We must thrive in our congregations, and to do so, emotional intelligence is crucial. So I'm going to stop there, but just giving Andy a little chance to reflect on that. But I remember this 25 years ago when I was a GP trainee. You really need to be emotionally mature to handle your patients. It's no good just knowing the medicine in your head if you can't relate to people, because they won't be listening to the medicine if they don't like you or if they don't think you're taking them seriously. We need to be good. This is true in church leadership as well. If we're not careful, all our other gifts will be diminished or ignored if we're not emotionally mature. So this is the take-home point. We need to know ourselves, be honest about ourselves. If we aren't good in this area, get some training. Well, it might be an official course. It might be just some personal studying for a week. And just as a final thought, and this is something I've brought up in Christian circles many times, those of us who've done chemistry for A level will remember that in a chemical reaction, there's always what we call the rate limiting step. So this reaction's going well, and then suddenly here's the slow point. And no matter how fast the rest of the chemical reaction is going, that slow point will slow you down. And if our emotional intelligence is our rate limiting step, we need some help, because everything else you do will get stuck because of that weak area. Thinking about my relationship sometimes with my GP partners, who were all Christians when we first started, we had some ding dongs. And, if I had applied this more, even though things I thought I was bringing across were, dare I say, I think they were right. But because I wasn't emotionally intelligent about it, it could sometimes put people's backs up, and I didn't achieve all that I could have achieved, which I would have achieved if I'd been more emotionally intelligent. So there's the thought for the day. Emotional intelligence, EQ, really matters.
There's an awful lot there to unpack. I'm quite looking forward to unpacking some of this. I'll tell you the first thing that I came to mind. I can't remember if I've shared this with you or not, but we were working in the church, my wife and I, full-time. We were the children's ministers, right? So we're in charge of all the children and families work. And we put a holiday club on, one that I'd used before. I'd written it myself. It's my own work. We used it elsewhere. It's really good. I thought we'll use it here. We're new. It's quite soon, summer. We haven't got time, so I'll just use the one I've used before. It's very good. No one else has seen it before. That's fine. And we had one person who was, I think, 18 years old, and we had quite a set to, which she lost, not unsurprisingly, because she said, "You're wrong, Andy. I've been doing holiday clubs for years. You don't know what you're talking about." I was in my 40s at this point. Now, I'm not one of those who says, if I'm older, I'm right. I've never, ever thought that, because if we disrespect or ignore the younger ones, we're going to miss some really important things. Jesus picked up with a child and said, this is what you need to be like. However, when she said, I've done lots of holiday clubs, what she meant was, well, I helped someone run them sometimes for a couple of years. I've been doing them for quite a lot longer. And quite frankly, everything she said was wrong. She actually had no valid points anyway, but it was the way that she said it. And when I said, that's fine, the door's over there, you can leave right now, one of our what they call in the Anglican Church, the wardens, she was in the kitchen as it happened, and she said, well done, you lasted a lot longer before I did, and I'd have said an awful lot worse to her to get her to leave. But she was completely out of line. She completely missed that I was in charge of this. It was my responsibility. But her emotional naivety, her emotional immaturity meant I had no interest at all in anything she had to say. Not only was she wrong factually about everything she was saying about how you can get children involved, 18 years old. No, sorry, you don't know yet. But two, her entire approach was, you're wrong, you're stupid, you're foolish, you don't know what you're talking about. Look at my knowledge, you're an idiot. And I'm thinking, right, but I'm actually the one in charge and paid for to be here, and I've actually done this for more than you've been alive, so perhaps I know a little bit as well.
Switched off because of the way she approached.
I didn't care what she had to say at that point.
Yeah, even if she'd been right, her approach was emotionally immature. And
totally.
Yeah, that's a good illustration. I'm sure all of us have done, sadly, or certainly I can say I've done that in the past. And I'm grateful for actually you mentioning that. I don't know much about emotional intelligence, which got me thinking, well, I used to, but actually I've forgotten it. So of course, in all of these talks, we tend to talk to ourselves, don't we? As well as anybody who might be listening. And it's got me thinking, okay, just remember, when you're approaching people, you want to get a point across, you need to be emotionally intelligent. Otherwise, they're not going to listen.
Yeah. And don't do it in the middle of a holiday club session when you've just gone to get for a glass of water. It is not a good time. The thing was, I will go on to this one actually a little bit more, because what she said was the way I was working was wrong, stupid, irresponsible, and I was forcing children not to be a part of what we're doing. And I'm thinking, well, I've been leading worship in churches for literally 25 years at this point. Pretty confident with what I'm doing. I've been leading worship for 30 years, so I think I know a thing or two here. Not in an arrogant way, but she said that you can't get these children to engage because they won't, because of what you're doing. And I said, well, no, I think the reason they're not engaging is because you hang on to them and sit on the floor. She left, and the very next moment that she wasn't there, the kids were standing up and getting engaged in all that was going on, which was exactly my point. You need to allow children to be different in a different scenario, and she just was having none of that.
How interesting. Well, thank you. That's a good illustration.
Yes. Well, I say that one carefully because I'm not happy that she left, but I also knew there was nothing I could do because I was in the middle of a holiday club on day 2 or whatever. And it's like,
what we pray is that she would have learned from it.
Oh, I hope so, because she walked out and she never came back again. I just think that's fine. The door's over there. I mean, literally, I had no time. I was often to do something else. So, but very grateful that the warden was stood there saying, "Well done. I would not have lasted that peacefully and patiently that long with the way that she spoke to you. That was so terrible." But if we don't come to someone with some measure of humility, if we don't honor and respect those in authority, which I was for her, then I've got little patience or any kind of tolerance for people who do that, because I'm not going to listen to you, because you know what? You're not coming in the right attitude. Everything, as you say, anything you might have to say is irrelevant.
And what they're saying, of course, is that we need to know ourselves, understand ourselves, and try and understand other people.
Yeah.
So, we may have a message and the message may be right, but those, if you want to, and I think this is what and Heather, my wife, has said this to me many times, you would be more successful in getting your message across if you were approached it a different way. And just reading this again, I'm grateful, because it's got me thinking, yes. Listen and learn.
I nearly sprayed my water as you said. I haven't met your wife. I have spoken to her once. I can imagine that conversation. Let's just put it that way.
Well, there we are. And everything you're imagining is almost certainly true.
Quite probably. Other stuff I wanted to think about, this emotional maturity. Did I share this with you before about an IT firm that realized that a female manager of an IT department would actually do better at relating, generally speaking, to customers if they were particularly, I'm trying to think of the right word, let's just say they're exceedingly computer friendly. Let's try and put it that way as politely as I can. Those sorts of folk who might struggle, women were better than men. And what they discovered as a firm was, rather than having a bloke at the top who, knows everything about a computer, but no one has a clue what they're saying, the woman actually they put in was just as intelligent and good with the computer. However, there was a greater generalized ability for her to engage emotionally with people than men who had a similar sort of interest and knowledge of computing.
Yeah. And I think there's obviously a big overlap between emotional intelligence, say, and empathy.
Massively.
And I guess that's what we're talking about. And you're absolutely right. In many organisations, including ours, when we have awkward problems and complaints, is this are very common, sadly, in general practice. And we get the women to deal with them. We might have to do our own report, but the ladies in the practice will have a one-to-one with the difficult customers, if you like, and do it better.
My wife has a brilliant theory on this. I'll be very careful how I say this. So when she used to work in a particular field, there were some aggressive situations that she was very much deliberately responsible for fixing. And what she found was that if a male colleague came into that situation, by the very nature of them being a man, didn't have to be aggressive, big, tall, just the fact they were male and they arrived in that situation would escalate something that she was able to de-escalate, because a man is immediately seen as a threat, whereas a woman is not. She was just as capable as they were. She could do whatever they needed to do to resolve the situation, being very careful. But actually, she said sometimes it was nice and calm. You could see it de-escalating, and a bloke would arrive and he wouldn't have to be aggressive. He wouldn't have to run into the situation and just say, "Hi, can I help?" And all of a sudden, all that de-escalation was right back up again, and the aggression came out.
There we are.
Being very cautious how I share that one. But I think that is a difference between men and women, and we ignore the difference of the two genders at our peril, because we each bring different strengths and weaknesses, and both of those are needed to help things work better.
Yeah. But I suppose another way of looking at it from today is that obviously none of us can change our gender. I think that been finally won in England. We can't change our gender, and we are who we are. But whether we're male or female, I think this headline, if you like, of being emotionally intelligent, and an essential and valuable tool for effective Christian leadership, is one that we think, well, whether we're top of the church, the Archbishop of Canterbury, or a home group leader, or some, we all have, most of us have some sort of leadership function. It might just even be within our families. How can we actually use this information well? And I think it's about being honest about yourself and just appreciate where other people are coming from, and try and empathize with them, and we'll all achieve more. So there's the message for today.
I wonder whether or not just the difference of asking a question and being willing to wait for an answer is perhaps the most obviously visible difference of someone with a higher emotional ability than somebody who hasn't. Because asking a question, I think you said this before, as a doctor, quite frequently, if you ask a question and take the time to listen, which is a critical component of that statement, all of a sudden the patients are then able to help you with a diagnosis, probably leading to the right medication, telling you what therapy they need, because they kind of know better than the doctor does what's wrong with them. They just don't have the vocabulary of that moment.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. Yes, and it is a real art. That's one. Hopefully, we will get better at over the years. Is how to ask questions. Yeah, you don't want people to drift off, and so you can always get them back on track. But if you ask the questions that we were always told at medical school, if you ask the right question, the patients will usually give you the answer. In which case, your job is a lot easier. So make life easier for yourself. Ask the question.
Here's a thought I have on, especially doctors in hospitals. I'm recounting as when I was in Salisbury Hospital, I'd had a heart rate of something like 260 something for a long time, and they were trying to get my heart rate down. And there were some exceedingly happily very, very good doctors in A&E, really proficient. And there were some that were very much more empathetic than others. There was one slightly more junior doctor who was brilliant at making me feel like I mattered, I valued, he cared about me. And there was another chap who I think was a consultant who, let's just say that I was really happy with his massive level of professionalism. He was a little bit less good at making me feel like he realized that I was actually a living human person in front of him and not just a pincushion. And I think the thing that I found interesting was I actually felt slightly safer with the consultant than the junior doctor, not because of their age or experience. I have no clue at that point what that meant. But it's the professionalism actually for me in that scenario won over empathy.
Okay, and in that case, there's a good team there because you've got an empathetic junior and a knowledgeable senior, and I think that's good because in a team we can bring different things. But I think it's equally the senior probably would achieve even more if he was more emotionally able. So there we go. There's a message for him there as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I saw the same thing replicated when I was in the cardiology ward overnight. Woke up in the morning, the senior consultant cardiology chap was there, and he just looked at me, pointed, and walked off. And I thought, hello, I'm here. There's a reason you're standing there, and I'm the reason. But there was another chap slightly below him he was incredibly knowledgeable to the point I'm thinking, how do you know that? Have you got a book or a computer? Is your brain missing and replaced by a computer? Amazing chap. You could see the amount of knowledge and talent. And yet he was much more friendly. It was in the middle of COVID and can I go home? Can't I? And he just stuck his head around the corner of a door, checked some things out. Big thumbs up and amazing green. You can go home. And I just thought, it was elated the way he spoke to me. And it lifted my spirits. And all the guys on the ward were like, yeah, he's good, isn't he? We've been here for a while.
Whether we're doctors or church leaders, we're not saying that being emotionally intelligent replaces knowledge.
No.
We need knowledge. We need theological knowledge. You need to be able to teach and preach. It's just that you'll be more effective if you get on well and have a proper relationship with your parishioners or your patients. So yes, it's not a replacement.
No.
It's best combination.
Absolutely. We must all have been in jobs or in businesses or in a church where you're looking at the pastor and thinking, do you even know that there's human beings in this church, or were you just interested in the theology? I remember one church that the pastor was insanely intelligent. He had loads of degrees in theology and psychology. And when you're chatting to the people in the church, you say, why aren't you coming to the church anymore? We got bored. We have no clue what he's talking about. He seems to like the sound of his own voice, talking about Hebrew and Greek. We don't really care. We just wanted to tell us, what is it we need to be more like Jesus? Really simple, but he had so much knowledge, he wanted to get it out.
Well, and there's something that he needs to know, which is, ask people, or, certainly if I was a church leader and my church was shrinking, I would be upset and certainly upset enough to say, well, why? What's going on here? Am I doing something right and everyone's leaving, but actually they're all wrong? Unlikely. Or am I doing something wrong and they're all leaving and I need to know why? Because it sounds like just a complete lack of emotional intelligence.
But that comes down to humility, doesn't it? And having the ability to say, am I getting this wrong?
Being humble is absolutely crucial. And we know that, Jesus and the Father hate pride. Pride puffs up and humility says, how can I help?
I would have listened to that young girl, 18-year-old, if she'd have come to me in a sensible way saying, look, I haven't been doing this for very long. I'd had a thought. Can we have a chat about it? At which point I would have said, no, we can talk later. That would have been the first thing. But because she went at me,
Yeah.
without any consideration of who is hearing it. And I'm thinking, I've got to deal with this. The kids can hear this. This is not good. I just need to de-escalate it and get her out, really. But I think it's that level of humility of, I knew I could be wrong. I'm quite happy to say that. I've always said, I make loads of mistakes. I'm not here because I'm perfect. I'm here because I've made enough mistakes and bounced off enough walls to think that's not a good way of doing that. Learn the hard way. But if we are going to approach someone, which I suppose is the back end of everything we're saying here, it's the flip side to the conversation. If you do want to go and talk to somebody, it's how you approach them in such a way that they're not backed into a corner. I remember one time someone saying, "You're so good at leading worship, I'm really offended." Where she was told,
I haven't come across that approach before.
I had it once. It was a good conversation. We dealt with it and we became really good friends after. But a lot of folks said, "Don't talk to Andy about this." Where's he supposed to go with you being offended that he's better at you than something? He's got nowhere to go, because what possible response could he have? And I think that's so important to think, well, when we're talking to someone, it's like saying, not you're rubbish, because now we're attacking the person. Actually might say, look, I'm not sure that was the best way of saying this, or perhaps we could have think another way, or did you think about what you were saying, or anything but other than you're rubbish? Because then that's assassinating the entire person rather than just trying to get a conversation.
Yeah, how interesting.
There you are. There's lots in here we could unpack for the next 14 hours, I think, quite happily. Right, Richard, thank you. Dr. Richard Scott is here to answer your questions. He's in the magazine as well, writing a column, so you can check him out there, puremediathemagazine.com. And if you've got any questions for him, you can send them to us here anonymously. hello@pure247radio.org, hello@pure247radio.org, and you can ask Dr. Richard Scott, formerly GP, recently retired, awesome man, any questions you like.
Thanks, Andy.
As long as it's medical related. Thank you, Richard.
Cheers.